The inventions that he came up with, the fundamental laws of physics that he figured out, underpin all of our modern day life.
We all know the face, the wild hair, the equation that changed the world. Albert Einstein is the definition of genius. But what if I told you that the biggest calculation of his life wasn't actually his? For decades, a stack of letters was hidden away in a Swiss attic. When they were finally opened, they revealed a secret partner, a ghostwriter who did the math while Einstein took the bows.
She was more interesting to Einstein when she was a fellow scientist than as suddenly now a nagging housewife.
This isn't just a rumor. The evidence is in the handwriting, and once you see the proof, you'll never look at E equals MC squared the same way again. The Woman Who Knew Too Much. Zurich, Switzerland, 1896. The air is cold, but inside the Swiss Federal Polytechnic, the competition is heating up. This is one of the hardest schools in Europe. To get in here, you have to be the best of the best. And in the physics department, there is only one woman. Her name is Mileva Marital. She is 21 years old, she is brilliant, and she is fighting a battle that no one else in the room can understand. You have to realize, back in the late 1800s, women weren't supposed to be scientists. They were supposed to be cooking, cleaning, and raising kids. But Mileva, she didn't care about fitting in, she was obsessed with math. She was born in Serbia in a town called Tidal. From the time she was a little kid, her dad knew she was different. While other kids were playing tag, Mileva was solving complex equations. Her father actually had to get special permission from the government just to let her sit in high school physics classes with the boys. She wasn't just good, she was a prodigy. So, here she is in Zurich. She is sitting in the front row, taking perfect notes. And in the back of the room, there's a 17-year-old kid who is slouching in his chair. He's messy, he's arrogant, and he hates going to class. His name is Albert Einstein. Now, history likes to paint Albert as this lone wolf genius. We imagine him sitting in a room, staring at a wall, and boom, relativity happens. But that is not how it went down, not even close. Albert was actually struggling. He was skipping lectures, he was getting on the professor's nerves. One professor, a guy named Heinrich Weber, actually told Albert to his face, "You're a smart boy, Einstein, but you have one great fault. You do not let yourself be told anything." Basically, Albert had the big ideas, but he lacked the discipline. Mileva, on the other hand, was like a human computer. She was organized. She was methodical. She could take a messy concept and turn it into a clean, solvable equation. And that is exactly why Albert fell for her. It wasn't just a romance, it was a merger. They started studying together. They swapped notes, and soon they were inseparable. They weren't just whispering sweet nothings to each other. They were whispering about thermodynamics. They were flirting with calculus. But here is the catch. While they were studying the same books and taking the same tests, the system was rigged. When it came time for their final exams in 1900, the bias was undeniable. They both took the same tests. They had the same thesis advisor. But when the grades came back, the difference was suspicious. Albert got a 4.9. Mileva got a 4.0. Now, a 4.0 isn't bad, but in this specific class, it was the lowest grade, and because of that, she was denied her degree. Albert graduated. Mileva didn't. Was she actually worse than him? Or was the all-male board of professors just unwilling to give a diploma to a woman? We might never know for sure, but look at the facts. Mileva tried to retake the test a year later. She was determined, but by then, she was carrying a secret that would derail her entire career and bind her to Albert forever. She was pregnant, and in 1901, being pregnant and unmarried wasn't just a scandal, it was social ruin. She had to hide, she had to quit her studies, the stress was eating her alive, and when she took the test again, she failed. Her academic career was officially over before it even started. But her work? Her work was just beginning. Because while Albert was out there looking for a job, writing letters to professors who ignored him, Mileva was at home, still crunching the numbers. And this is where the mystery really begins. We have the letters, hundreds of them. Albert and Mileva wrote to each other constantly when they were apart. And these aren't just love letters, they are lab reports. In March 1901, Albert wrote something that makes historians scratch their heads. He said, and I quote, How happy and proud I will be when the two of us together will have brought our work on relative motion to a victorious conclusion. Did you catch that? He didn't say my work, he said our work. He didn't say my theory, he said our investigation. This wasn't a one-time slip of the tongue. He did it over and over again. He wrote about our paper on molecular forces. He treated her as a partner, a co-pilot. Some people try to say, oh, he was just being romantic. He was just trying to make her feel included. Really? Albert Einstein was a guy who was obsessed with credit. He wasn't the type to share the spotlight unless he had to. If he said our work, it's because it was their work. But as the years went on, the our started to disappear. The we turned into I. And the woman who helped build the foundation of modern physics was about to be erased completely. But the letters told a different story. Relativity's silent partner. Let's fast forward to 1905. Historians call this the Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year. At this point, Albert and Mileva are married. They are living in a small apartment in Bern. Albert is working at the Swiss patent office. It's a boring, dead-end job. He sits at a desk all day looking at blueprints for gravel sorters and typewriters. And yet, in his spare time, he manages to produce 4 scientific papers that completely break the laws of physics. The photoelectric effect. This proves that light acts like a particle, not just a wave. This is the paper that eventually wins the Nobel Prize. Brownian motion. This proves that atoms actually exist. Before this, atoms were just a theory. Special relativity. This changes how we understand time and space. This is the big one. E equals mc squared, the most famous equation in history. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Now ask yourself this. How does a guy working 8 hours a day at a patent office with a new baby at home crank out the 4 most complex papers in history in less than 6 months? It's almost impossible. Unless he had help. Unless he had someone at home who was just as smart as him, checking his math, refining his theories, and doing the heavy lifting while he was at work. Mileva was home, but she wasn't just changing diapers. We have a witness. A Russian physicist named Abram Jaffe claimed that he saw the original manuscripts of these 1905 papers. These are the handwritten drafts before they were printed in the journals. And Jaffe said something that blows this whole story wide open. He said the papers were signed Einstein Marital. Marital is the Hungarian spelling of Maric, Mileva's last name. Jaffe saw 2 names, but when the papers were published in the journal Annalen der Physik, only one name was printed, Albert Einstein. Where did Mileva's name go? Why was it removed? Some historians think Mileva agreed to take her name off. Maybe she wanted to help Albert get a university job. In those days, a paper co-authored by a woman might not have been taken seriously. So she might have made the ultimate sacrifice. She let him take the credit so the work would be accepted. There is a famous story about a device they built together. It was a machine to measure tiny amounts of electricity. Mileva and a friend built it. Albert just wrote the description. But when they filed for the patent, Mileva's name was missing. When her friend asked her why she didn't put her name on it, she replied with a sentence that is both beautiful and tragic. She said, "What for? We are both only one stone." Einstein, one stone. She saw them as a single unit. She didn't care about the fame, she cared about the work. But Albert, he cared about the fame. And as soon as those 1905 papers hit the stands, the world went crazy. Suddenly, the patent clerk was a celebrity. Universities were begging him to come teach. He was the new king of science. And Mileva? She was just the housewife in the background. Albert Einstein was not a mathematician. He was a physicist. He had the big concepts, the visual ideas. He could imagine writing a beam of light. But the complex calculus needed to prove those ideas? That wasn't his strong suit. Mileva, however, was a math wizard. During their college years, Albert admitted in letters that he was lazy with math. He relied on her notes. Years later, when Albert was working on general relativity, he got stuck. He actually had to ask his friend Marcel Grossman for help with the math. He said, "Grossman, you must help me or else I'll go mad." So if he needed help in 1912, who was helping him in 1905? It was the person sleeping in the bed next to him. There is a story from the Polytechnic days where Albert reportedly said, "My wife solves all my mathematical problems." If that is true, then the equation E equals mc squared isn't just Einstein's equation, it's a joint custody equation. But fame does strange things to people. As Albert became more famous, he started to drift away. He traveled more, he started getting attention from other women. The partnership that had built the theory of relativity was starting to crack. And Mileva was about to learn a hard lesson. When you give someone else the power to hold your legacy, they can drop it whenever they want. And the drop was coming fast. The end of the partnership. By 1914, the fairy tale was over. Albert was a global superstar. He had moved the family to Berlin, Germany, to take a prestigious job. Mileva didn't want to go. She loved Switzerland. She didn't like the vibe in Berlin, and she certainly didn't like Albert's cousin, Elsa. Yeah, about that. Albert was spending a lot of time with his cousin Elsa. And let's just say they weren't just playing checkers. Mileva knew it. The tension in the house was unbearable. They were fighting constantly. The intellectual partnership was dead. They weren't talking about physics anymore. They were arguing about money, about the kids, about loyalty. And then Albert did something cold. He sat down and wrote a contract, a list of conditions. He told Mileva that if she wanted to stay married to him, if she wanted to keep living in his house for the sake of the children, she had to agree to these rules. This isn't a rumor. We have the list. And when you read it, it sends shivers down your spine. Here is what the great humanitarian, the man of peace, wrote to his wife. Condition 1. You will make sure that my clothes and laundry are kept in good order. Condition 2. You will make sure that I receive 3 meals a day in my room. Condition 3. You will make sure that my bedroom and study are kept neat, and especially that my desk is left for my use only. Okay, so far, he wants a maid, but it gets worse. Condition 4. You will renounce all personal relations with me insofar as they are not completely necessary for social reasons. Basically, don't talk to me unless we are in public. Condition 5. You will stop talking to me if I request it. You will leave my bedroom or study immediately without protest if I request it. And the kicker. Condition 6. You will expect no intimacy from me, nor will you reproach me in any way. He was turning his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who helped him discover relativity, into a silent servant. He was erasing her humanity. Imagine being Mileva. You are brilliant. You are a scientist. You gave up your degree, your name, and your career to build this man up. And now he is treating you like furniture. She tried to make it work for the sake of the boys, Hans Albert and Edward. But it was impossible. A few months later, in July 1914, Mileva packed her bags. She took the boys and went back to Zurich. Albert stayed in Berlin. As she boarded the train, she was crying. Albert! He reportedly cried too, but tears of relief. With Mileva gone, he was free to be the genius. He was free to be with Elsa. But he still had a problem. He needed a divorce. And Mileva wasn't going to give it up easily. She knew what she was worth. She knew what she had contributed, and this leads us to the most suspicious financial transaction in the history of science. Usually in a divorce, you split the bank accounts, you split the house. But Albert didn't have much cash. He had fame, but he wasn't rich yet. So he made Mileva a promise, a gamble. He told her, "One day I am going to win the Nobel Prize. I know I will, and when I do, I will give you the money. All of it." Think about that. The Nobel Prize is the highest honor in science. It comes with a massive cash reward. Why would Albert Einstein, a man who loved money and security, give 100% of that prize money to his ex-wife? Was it just child support? Or was it hush money? Was it an admission of guilt? Some historians believe that this deal was acknowledging her contribution. It was a way of paying her for her share of the work without admitting it publicly. It was a settlement. "I keep the fame, you take the cash," Mileva agreed. She took the bet. They officially divorced in 1919. Albert married his cousin Elsa shortly after. Mileva was left alone in Zurich with 2 boys to raise. But the story doesn't end there, because getting the money was one thing. Surviving the tragedy that was coming next was something else entirely. The storm was just beginning. The mother's sacrifice. The news breaks. Albert Einstein has won the Nobel Prize in physics. He didn't win it for relativity, oddly enough. He won it for the photoelectric effect, one of those 4 papers from 1905. One of the papers Mileva likely worked on. True to his word, Albert transferred the prize money to Mileva. It was a huge sum. In today's money, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mileva was smart with the cash. She didn't blow it. She bought 3 apartment buildings in Zurich. She moved into one and rented out the others. For the first time in years, she felt secure. She had income. She had a home. But the universe wasn't done testing Mileva Marital. Her youngest son, Eduard, was a sensitive kid. He was smart, musical, and wanted to be a psychiatrist. He worshipped his father, but Albert was rarely around. In 1930, when Eduard was just 20 years old, he had a breakdown. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Back in the 1930s, mental health treatment wasn't therapy and medication. It was brutal. It was insulin shock therapy, it was heavy sedation, and it was incredibly expensive. Mileva's life shifted from science to survival. She dedicated every waking second to Edward. She was his nurse, his protector, his anchor. Albert? He couldn't handle it. He visited a few times, but he found Edward's condition disturbing. He distanced himself. He even wrote letters suggesting that maybe it would be better if Edward just went to sleep permanently. That is the cold, hard truth. The great humanitarian struggled to show humanity to his own son. But Mileva never gave up. The cost of Edward's care was astronomical. The medical bills piled up. Slowly, the Nobel Prize money began to drain away. She had to sell one apartment building, then another. She was losing everything she had built to save her son. By the 1940s, Mileva was old, tired, and nearly broke. She was giving private math lessons just to buy groceries. Imagine this scene: an elderly woman in Zurich walking slowly down the street in worn-out clothes. Passers-by don't give her a second glance. They don't know that this woman helped discover the speed of light. They don't know that her mind once raced alongside the most famous brain in history. To them, she's just a struggling widow. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Princeton, New Jersey, Albert Einstein is an icon. He's meeting presidents. He's sticking his tongue out for cameras. He's the most beloved man on earth. The contrast is sickening. But even in her poverty, Mileva kept her secrets. She never went to the press. She never wrote a tell-all book. She never tried to destroy Albert's reputation. Why? Maybe she still loved him. Maybe she did it for the kids. Or maybe she knew that the world wouldn't believe her anyway. In 1948, Mileva suffered a severe stroke. She was alone in a hospital bed in Zurich. Eduard was in a clinic. Albert was in America. On August 4th, 1948, Mileva Marital died. There was no fanfare, no state funeral. She was buried in a simple grave in Zurich. For decades, her grave was neglected. People forgot where it was. It wasn't until 2004, over 50 years later, that a plaque was finally put up to honor her. But the real tragedy isn't that she died. It's that her legacy was buried with her. For a long time, the letters were hidden. The executors of Einstein's estate tried to keep the family drama quiet. They wanted to protect the image of the saintly genius. But truth has a way of leaking out. In the 1980s, the letters were finally published, and the world gasped. We saw the our work. We saw the collaboration. We saw the cruelty. And we had to ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question. Did we give the prize to the wrong person? One stone. So here we are. The final calculation. We have looked at the letters. We have looked at the grades. We have looked at the betrayed promises. But now we have to ask the ultimate question, the one that makes historians sweat. Was Mileva Marital the true genius behind relativity? It's not that simple, but it's also not as impossible as the establishment wants you to believe. Most historians agree that Albert had the spark. He had the visionary imagination. He was the guy who could look at a clock tower and imagine riding a beam of light away from it. He was the one who could ask the crazy questions that no one else dared to ask. But asking the question is only half the battle. You have to prove it. And that is where Mileva comes in. Mileva was the anchor. She was the heavy lifter. She was the one who took Albert's wild, chaotic daydreams and grounded them in hard, cold mathematics. She checked the logic. She ran the numbers. She kept him focused when his mind started to wander. Without her, Albert might have just been a brilliant dreamer who never finished anything. A guy in a patent office with crazy ideas and zero proof. Think of it like a rock band. Albert was the lead singer. He had the wild hair, he had the charisma, he was the one on the posters and the magazine covers. But Mileva? She was the songwriter, she was the drummer keeping the beat, she was the producer in the booth, making sure the track didn't fall apart. And what happens when the lead singer goes solo? They usually forget about the band that got them there. They claim they wrote all the hits themselves. But there is a wild theory here that suggests this wasn't just about ego, it was about a deal. A secret pact made in the shadows of their failing marriage. Let's talk about the money. When Albert and Mileva divorced, it wasn't amicable. It was a war. But the terms of the divorce were strange. Bizarre, actually. In the divorce decree, Albert Einstein made a promise. He said that if he ever won the Nobel Prize in physics, which hadn't happened yet, he would give 100% of the prize money to Mileva. Stop and think about that. Why would a man give away a fortune to an ex-wife he couldn't stand? Why would he give her the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars? The mainstream story is that it was just child support. It was a way to ensure she could care for their sons, Hans Albert and Edward. But the wild theory suggests something much darker. Was it hush money? Some researchers believe this was a settlement for her intellectual property. They believe Mileva knew she could destroy his reputation. She could have gone to the press. She could have released the original drafts. She could have proven that the miracle year of 1905 was a two-person job. So Albert bought her silence. He bought the credit. He bought the fame. And the price tag was the Nobel Prize money. He got the glory. She got the cash. And she needed that cash badly. Because by then, life had crushed her. But there is another piece of evidence that fuels an even crazier theory. The theory of the vanishing signature. We mentioned the Russian physicist Abram Jaffe earlier. He was a heavy hitter in the science world. He explicitly stated that he saw the original 1905 papers before they were published, and he said something that keeps conspiracy theorists awake at night. He said the papers were signed Einstein Marital. Marital is the Hungarian version of marriage, Mileva's last name. But when the papers were printed in the scientific journal Annalen der Physik, Mileva's name was gone. Scrubbed, deleted. Why? Did the editor remove it because a woman's name would discredit the work? In 1905, the scientific community was a boys' club. A paper co-authored by a woman might have been thrown in the trash. Did Albert remove it to simplify his brand? Or did Mileva remove it herself? This is the most heartbreaking theory of all. The theory that she volunteered to be invisible. Why would she do that? Because she wanted the work to succeed more than she wanted the credit. She knew the bias of the world. She knew that Einstein alone had a better chance of being taken seriously than Einstein and his wife. She sacrificed her name for the sake of the science. She was content to be one stone with her husband until that stone crushed her. Mileva's story isn't just about Einstein, it's about something historians call the Matilda effect. This is a real documented phenomenon. It describes the systematic bias against acknowledging the achievements of women scientists. Their work is attributed to their male colleagues over and over again. It's a pattern. It happened to Rosalind Franklin. She took the photograph 51, that proved the double helix structure of DNA. But Watson and Crick took the data, took the credit, and took the Nobel Prize. It happened to Lise Meitner. She literally discovered nuclear fission. She split the atom. But her male colleague, Otto Hahn, got the award. She was ignored. And we are almost certain it happened to Mileva Maric. She was fighting a system that was designed to keep her out. The fact that she even made it to the Zurich Polytechnic in 1896 is a miracle. The fact that she held her own against Einstein in physics and beat him in math grades, that is legendary. But history is written by the winners, and Albert won. He went on to become the most famous face on the planet. He became the definition of genius. He married his cousin Elsa, who cooked his meals and let him work in peace, never asking him about tensors or relativity. Mileva was left behind in Zurich. She gave piano lessons to survive. She spent her Nobel money caring for their son Edward, who developed severe schizophrenia. She died alone in 1948. For decades, she was just a footnote, a bitter ex-wife, a historical detail. But today things are changing. The internet is digging. People are going back to the archives. We are reading the letters with fresh eyes. We are looking at the wild theories and realizing they make a lot of sense. We see a woman who is passionate, driven, and fiercely loyal. We see a mother who sacrificed her fortune for her son. We see a scientist who was erased. If you go to Zurich today, you can visit the house where they lived. You can walk the halls of the university where they met, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear the scratching of two pens on paper. If Albert Einstein had never met Mileva, would he still be a genius or just a patent clerk with crazy ideas? It makes you wonder how many other silent partners are hiding in our history books. Hit that like button if you believe Mileva deserves credit, and subscribe for more hidden history.